Just a segment of Ron Paul Liberty Report for you.
Rule the world anymore. So I think there's a lot of major things going on now, especially with Iran, and then the subject will come up in our discussion about the ships that we took that were on their way to deliver oil to the people of Venezuela. Yeah, they're messed up, but the people are messed up and have become dependent on it. But just to punish the people and the hospitals and who knows what isn't hardly a solution to finding, to encourage, better relationships with Venezuela. But then to say better relationships with Venezuela, well, you guys, who do you represent?
The comments?
Maybe they'll come our way.
Yeah.
So that's the goal of talking to people. We've mentioned so often, Cuba, how long we've been antagonistic toward Cuba, and maybe talking with them and trading with them a lot sooner would have been helpful.
We've tried to give Trump the benefit of the doubt when he does something that we agree with, that we think is moving us toward a more intelligent, more peaceful foreign policy. And we've done that, but at the same time, we get some criticism. But we have to also call out a really an utterly failed policy. And we'll continue to, of course, give him praise, but unfortunately, there's been a consistency in Trump's Iran policy. He said it on the campaign trail. He's actually continued to do it. And it has not given the results that were promised. In fact, things are much worse. Depending on your perspective, if you're a neocon, you might think, this is pretty good. We're getting closer to war. But for the rest of us, the people who actually have a brain and a conscience, it's been a complete disaster. And normally in those situations, you'd rethink your policy if it's not producing the right results. But of course, we're talking about Washington, so the answer is to double down. But what triggered this discussion of ours is over the weekend, on Friday, they were holding a vote in the UN Security Council. The U.S. put a proposal forth to extend the total arms embargo against Iran, which is set to expire in October, as a function of the JCPOA agreement, the Iran deal. And this is part of it. This was kind of a rolling relaxing of sanctions as Iran continued to fulfill its obligations and the signatories continued to fulfill theirs. Well, this was the next step, and it was set to expire in October. And of course, the U.S. can't stand that. That can't happen. So what did they do? They sent the greatest diplomat in the history of the world, Mike Pompeo. He spent all summer twisting arms in Europe and elsewhere trying to get the UN Security Council to vote with the United States to extend these sanctions. And unfortunately, with all of his charm, what a shock, he was unsuccessful. And it was absolutely a rout for the U.S. There were 11 abstentions. The only yes vote the U.S. got was that mighty powerhouse, the Dominican Republic, which voted for us. Otherwise, a complete failure. So that means that they are not able to push this forward. What they were hoping to do, Dr. Paul, because they knew they couldn't pass it, because Russia and China would have vetoed it. But if they could have triggered a Russia-China veto, they could have had a symbolic victory in saying, hey, well, it was vetoed, but we had the majority on the Security Council, we have the momentum. So that was what the best case scenario was. They didn't even get that. It was an utter wash.
Sometimes you wonder how they can get people up at the top a lot like Pompeo. I think he's a neocon, as I recall. And what about, if he needs a little help, he can always go and get advice from Elliot Abrams. That'll help him too.
Yeah.
The advisors, for foreign policy aren't on the side of our position of non-intervention. The talk may be of one thing, but strategically it's always the same thing. And, when this treaty that was signed with UAE and with Israel, the one headline that caught my attention, and it could very easily come from our administration, there will be a tremendous increase in sales of weapons to the UAE. Can you believe that? I mean, the ink isn't even dry, and they're counting the money they're going to make. Just like that's what the world needs, are more weapons. That doesn't mean that weapons cause war. But and to defend our country, we don't need more weapons. But it's all part of this game they play. And people say, well, no, we might not need them, but we need to have some profits in these trying times.
Yeah,
you know? So
right.
we will sell the weapons to the UAE, and they can be strong, and then we won't have to send any more weapons over there. That kind of nonsense. But they're always in the middle of it. The military-industrial complex, very, very powerful. I am sensing that that our hopes are fading a bit about the deep state not having as much influence. But when you look at what we're talking about, I mean, this is deep state stuff.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is deep state stuff. And then what about the deep state influence on the money being spent? I mean, huge amounts of money, and that's Federal Reserve stuff. So the deep state is alive and well. The people are getting poorer. The people in this country are getting poorer, and it's all it's doing is galvanizing the radicals. They're going to burn down the cities because they want to usher in the saviors in Marxists. So they're going to come in and say, look how these free market people did. You had the conservative Republicans charge. Look at what's happening. So it's a real challenge for us to keep the message going. But there's a lot of people are sensing that there's something seriously wrong with our policies in a bipartisan way.
Well, on those arms sale, that's the silver lining in the cloud. The middle class in America might say, what's that have to do with me, But the fact is, it does affect them, and it does affect their bottom line. It is making them poorer, because we're all taxed to pay for the development of these weapons that the private companies develop. As you know, Dr. Paul, that money comes out of our pocket. Then they develop these weapons, and then they sell them overseas, and they privatize the profits. They socialize the cost of developing them, privatize the profits. The extremely wealthy, all the people, all the Beltway bandits get richer and richer. Well, meanwhile, the rest of us working and middle-class Americans get poorer.
They throw terms around a lot. Marxism, fascism, anti-fascism, and all this. But you just described what I believe is fascism.
Yeah.
And fascism doesn't mean that they actually take legal ownership of these companies. Boeing isn't owned; they're owned by a private company, but their livelihood depends on the government. I don't think Boeing's going to fail. I don't think these big companies are going to fail, and so they go along with it. And the blame goes. This is what gripes me of it so often. The blame goes to us who believe in free markets. They say, see what free markets do? And yet at the same time we realize that it's a bipartisan support for a fascistic intervention. And if you don't want to use the word fascist, it's crony capitalism, it's not free markets,
Yeah.
It's not sound money, and it has nothing to do with balanced budgets and promoting liberty.
Yeah, welfare for the rich.